And then Elric remembered a story his mother had read to him about a legendary hero who carried a magical flame. A flame that symbolized courage, hope, and perseverance. Elric realized that he too had a flame to carry, a flame to keep burning in a world that seemed to have forgotten its importance. So he set out on a journey to remind people of the power of fire, not as a destructive force, but as a source of light, warmth, and connection. But what if I told you that there's another way to interpret this story? Elric's journey is not just about preserving tradition, but also about embracing progress. You see, in Elderwood, there's a deep appreciation for the simple things in life. The beauty of a starry night, the warmth of a candle flame, the quiet moments of contemplation. These are the things that make life rich and meaningful. But in Howlworth, there's a celebration of progress and innovation. The marvel of electric lights, the convenience of modern living, the optimism of a future full of possibilities. These are the things that drive society forward, that improve our lives and expand our horizons. See, Elderwood represents a time when life was simpler, closer to nature and perhaps a bit slower. It's a place where people found solace in the flickering flames of candles and oil lamps, where the rhythm of life was dictated by the sun's arc across the sky. But Howlworth symbolizes the future, a world illuminated by the dazzling brilliance of electricity, where towering glass lamps banish darkness and homes glow with eternal light. So which one is better, Elderwood or Howlworth? Well, maybe both. So which one is better? Well, why not both? Why not strive for a world where we can enjoy the best of both Elderwood and Howlworth?
No.
Where we can embrace the marvels of technology, while also cherishing the simple joys of life. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, click here to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time, where we can light up the night with electric brilliance, while also finding solace in the flicker of a candle flame. Now, if you enjoyed this story, please consider liking the video. The wind returned to Elderwood that year with a bitterness not felt in a decade. Snow fell earlier than expected, and the woods wore a heavy silence. Even the birds seemed to have fled the cold. But in the heart of the village, behind thick wooden walls and glowing hearths, life carried on steady and warm. Elric was back in Elderwood, not just as a firekeeper, but as a symbol of something larger. His time in Howlworth had changed him. His posture was more assured, his words gentler but sharper. And his ideas now carried across rooms like sparks from dry flint. But he wasn't seeking attention, he was building something. The two fires. The blacksmith offered nails and iron hinges. Marta stitched banners of deep orange and silver blue colors that represented the flame and the current. Next to the old barn, construction had begun on Elderwood's own school of flame and wire. Children helped carry bricks. Inside the unfinished walls, Elric placed two altars side by side. One held a candle hand dipped from beeswax. The other held a small copper coil connected to a tiny light bulb powered by a spinning wheel. This, he told the village children, is not a choice between old and new. These are two tools, both useful, both meaningful. You must learn how to hold one in each hand. Fire in the blood, one of Elric's students was a boy named Thomel, quiet but curious, with a habit of asking difficult questions. Why did people ever stop using fire? He asked one day. They didn't stop, Elric replied. They forgot why they used it. Thomel frowned. But isn't electricity better? It's brighter, cleaner, easier? It is, Elric admitted. But fire teaches you something electricity cannot. Like what? Elric smiled. Patience, risk, and the meaning of warmth, not just heat. Then tell me what changes. That night, Elric gave Thomel a task. Spend 3 days lighting your family's home with nothing but candles and firewood. The Trial of Ash's neighbors checked on each other, delivering warm soup and extra blankets. The blacksmith opened his forge for warmth. The barn became a shelter for those with fragile homes. And just like that, the wires fell silent again. As the winter deepened, a storm arrived, a furious force of wind and ice that howled through the valley for days. Trees snapped, roads vanished under snow, electricity vanished. The bulb over Marta's table dimmed and died. Copper coils froze in place. But Elderwood didn't panic this time. I couldn't get the fire to start for an hour, because they had remembered. You carry it with you, even after the flame goes out. Candles were lit, fires were stoked, and in every window, flickering light danced again, just as it had for centuries. Well, Thalmal's discovery after the storm. Thalmal approached Elric with frost in his hair and soot on his hands. Instant. Efficient. My fingers are burned, he said. I dropped wax on my arm. He invited her to sit for an hour without speaking, only watching the flame. Delegates from distant towns and cities began to visit. Some came curious, others skeptical. Elric raised an eyebrow. And what did you learn? Thalmal's voice was low, but sure. That light isn't free. It has weight. Elric smiled. You've passed the trial. That was the moment I learned how to protect the flame. From that day, Thalmal became one of the most devoted learners in the school. And in time, he'd become a firekeeper himself. He didn't use the electric lamp. Had asked for fire soft and real. No visitors from the south by late winter. Word of Elderwood's quiet wisdom had spread beyond the valley. One delegate, a stern woman named Mistress Calda, said, "We don't have time for candles in the city. Everything must be fast." Elric led her to a small room lit only by firelight. The candle broke in two. You cried like the night itself had ended. When the hour ended, she stood in silence for several moments before whispering, "I had forgotten how to be still." Marta's fading light. That spring, Marta fell ill. Her breath became shallow, her steps slower. The village healer said it was time her life, like a well-burnt candle, was gently nearing its end. Noticed something he had missed for years, a faint line stretching across the valley. Beyond Elderwood, past Halworth, toward the distant mountains. Elric stayed at her bedside every night, reading aloud by candlelight. One evening, as the wind rustled outside and the flame danced low, she said, "I remember when you were a boy." Elric smiled through his tears. Marta's last words were a whisper. "Then you've already done more than I ever hoped for." She passed with the candles still burning. The memorial, Marta's memorial, was held in the barn, surrounded by firelight. No wires were allowed that day. People shared stories of how she kept the fire during storms, taught the value of silence, and raised a boy who lit the path for others. Thalmal stood and said, "She taught us that even in darkness, we are never truly lost if we carry even the smallest flame." Elric didn't speak much, but he lit a candle and placed it on her favorite chair. It flickered gently, then stood tall. The map of light. After Marta's passing, Elric opened Corbin's map again. At the bottom, in Corbin's handwriting, were the words, "Greater than where the first fire was found." Elric knew then that his journey wasn't over. The school of flame and wire was thriving, but something deeper called to him, a history yet uncovered. And so, as spring returned to the valley, Elric packed a satchel once more with flint, wax, a candle, and the map.
Ow!
He wasn't just a firekeeper anymore. He was now a seeker of the first flame. Elric stood at the edge of Elderwood, the map clenched in one hand, a satchel across his shoulder, and a candle in his coat pocket. Spring had painted the valley green again. Birds returned to sing, and the rivers rushed with melting snow.
Ow.
But Elric's heart wasn't resting. He was following a whisper, a thread through time drawn by Corbin's hand in Marta's last wish. Never let the flame die. Ahead of him, the trail vanished into the unknown. Behind him, Elderwood lived, in Balenci electric wires buzzed above, and warm fires glowed within. His destination lay deep in the mountains, where Corbin had once marked the words, "Greater than where the first fire was found." Into the wild. He walked through forests where light barely touched the moss, across old stone bridges, and into forgotten villages that still lived entirely by firelight. Elric's journey began with well-worn roads, friendly faces, and warm inns. But soon the settlements thinned, and the hills turned to rugged stone. In one such village, Creighton as Holloway met an old woman who greeted him by candle, even at midday. "You seek the flame path?" she rasped. "Many do. Few return." Elric showed her the map. She traced the line with trembling fingers. Yes, yes, this was once known. Past in secret. The trail leads to the Ashvault, beyond the Firespine Mountains. Some say it's where the world first learned to fear and worship fire. "Why forgotten?" Elric asked. "Some knowledge," she said, "burns too hot for careless hands." Elric crossed narrow passes, climbed ridges wrapped in mist, and descended into valleys, where old carvings decorated the rocks, spirals, suns, and open hands. Wolves howled in the distance. Rain tried to drown his sparks, but his fire never died. The Ash Vault holds not just light but truth. If you find it, do not hoard it, do not fear it, let it live. The Firespine Mountains rose like giants from the earth's sharp, blackened peaks, as if forged by the flame itself. The air around it was warm, though no fire burned. He camped each night with a fire no bigger than his palm, careful not to attract attention. The walls were carved with ancient symbols, some older than language. There were chambers filled with charred bones, broken pots, and stone tools. In the deepest room, Elric found what Corbin had meant. One night, while camped beneath a stone arch carved with flames, he opened Corbin's letter again. Elric, if you've come this far, you are more than a keeper now, you are a guardian. But remember, the brightest flame casts the darkest shadow. The flames seemed to whisper not with words, but with memory. The Ash Vault, after 12 days in the mountains, Elric found it. A cave. Hidden behind thick ivy, surrounded by black stone pillars. He stepped inside, and the world changed. The air was thick with the scent of charcoal and earth. It's a central fire pit, untouched by time. And in its center, a flame still burned. No wood fed it, no oil sustained it, and yet it glowed, faint, blue, eternal. The memory fire, Elric knelt before it. The flame was unlike anything he had ever seen, silent, cool to the eye, yet impossible to ignore. It didn't flicker, it breathed. He felt something deep stir inside him, not fear, not joy, but reverence. Visions came. The first humans huddled around sparks, eyes wide in awe. As its wick caught the eternal flame, it pulsed once, then settled into a steady glow. A mother passing fire to her child in a cave, temple burning with knowledge lost in time, cities rising with fire, and falling by it. Corbin, younger, lighting his first candle in this very room. Tears rolled down Elric's cheeks. This is the beginning, he whispered, the soul of all light. Taking the flame flowers bloomed. Children played, the wires hummed, fires glowed. Balance, once again, lived here. Elric knew he couldn't take the flame itself, but he could carry its echo. He lit a single candle from an especial one, carved by hand, dipped in silence. We will not worship it, but we will remember it. He placed it in a glass jar, sealed it with wax, and held it to his chest. From now on, wherever he walked, he would carry not just a fire, but the first fire. Eureka descended from the mountains, slower than he had climbed them. His heart was full, but heavy. When he returned to Creighton's Hollow, the old woman gasped. He taught not just students now, but firekeepers from across the region, who came to learn what he had learned. You found it, she said. I can feel it in your eyes. I found something more than light, he replied. Found truth. He taught the villagers new firekeeping ways, shared the symbols he saw, and gave their temple a new candle, one lit from the flame of ages. They wept, and for the first time in generations, sang the fire songs again. Arrival at Elderwood. When Elric finally reached Elderwood, it was early summer, but the people sensed something had changed in him. He walked to the town square, placed the candle jar on the central pedestal, and spoke. This flame came from the Ash Vault, the first fire ever lit by human hands. He opened the jar. The blue flame rose gently, then flickered into warm amber. And Elderwood glowed, not just in light, but in spirit. Legacy. Elric returned to the school, taught them how to carry fire without burning, how to hold light in both hands, electric and eternal, how to tell stories that only made sense when told beside a flame. He said, fire is not ours to own, it is ours to protect, to understand, to pass forward. And when he sat alone, he would sometimes hold that candle and listen not for voices, but for memory. Because in fire, there is always a story waiting to be told. The wind sang a song of change through the trees of Elderwood. Years had passed. Elderwood had changed. No longer was it just a quiet mountain village tucked away in a green valley. Then the numbers grew. People came from cities and valleys, from towers buzzing with electricity and towns where darkness had been forgotten. They came with questions. They came with curiosity. They came with the quiet hope that light could still mean something. He knew the wisdom in the ancient adage, while the flame burns, share its warmth. Yet he also understood that the flickering light of a single candle could not illuminate the vast darkness smothering the world. His heart swelled with a mix of pride and melancholy. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, understanding dawning in their eyes. Others looked puzzled, waiting for him to elaborate. At his side glowed the eternal candle from the asphalt, casting dancing shadows on the faces around him. It pulsed gently, as if recognizing its siblings. For a moment, the only sound was the crackle of flames, the soft sigh of the wind, and the rustle of leaves overhead. Then, breaking the silence, Elric spoke. Each firekeeper placed their flame in the center. There were 100 fires, 100 stories. Silence followed. It was deep, meaningful, echoing the quiet strength of the flames that bound them. Elderwood had become a sanctuary, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. But to truly illuminate the world, its light needed to spread its wings and touch every corner, every heart. We wish to send students, engineers, teachers, scholars to Elderwood, not to teach but to learn. In return, we offer you an invitation to speak before the Assembly of the Seven Cities. We believe your words could help build a world where knowledge does not erase memory. The world is watching. Lady Rhina, High Artificer of Halworth. From the glint of polished metal to the soft flicker of oil lamps, they ranged in size. Shape Elric felt a surge of pride mixed with trepidation. To address the assembly was an immense honor, but also a daunting task. I have walked among you, he said, and seen how your lamps illuminate the night, chasing away darkness with electric fire. The artificers and scholars shifted uncomfortably, while the merchants and traders nodded approvingly. Elric paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. The crowd was mesmerized. The candle seemed to grow brighter, its flame dancing with an ethereal glow. The silence was deafening, shattering the complacency that had dulled the city's spirit. Your streets are alive with inventions that make life easier, quicker, brighter. I speak of the light that dances in the flickering of a candle flame, in the comforting glow of a hearth fire, in the warm reflection of a lantern.
Oh.
Send us your flame, they asked, and Elderwood answered, but roared in the wind, carried on the backs of birds, echoing in the rush of rivers. It was a tale of resilience, of wisdom, and above all, of light. For the flame of Elderwood had not just survived the darkness, it had become its guiding star. This light is older than your cities, humbler than your inventions. It was a declaration that every school across the 7 cities would teach both electrical science and firecraft. It was the first time in history that flame was treated not as obsolete, but as equal. Yet it has outlived empires, outshone armies, and carried more stories than all your books. You have tamed lightning and bent it to your will, giving light to those who have never known what it means to live in shadows. Your achievements are a marvel. He sought counsel from the elders, each bearing the wisdom of lives well lived. Finally, the day of departure arrived. The weight of his message, delivered with such quiet conviction, was undeniable. How could he, a simple woodsman turned firekeeper, hope to enlighten the minds that had powered the very cities? The writer bore urgent news and a sealed envelope. The envelope bore a golden crest, Council of Light. Towers kissed the clouds, and night looked like day. Inside a hall of steel and stone, he stood before leaders, inventors, thinkers, and kings. Elric broke the seal, unfolded the parchment, and began to read. An intensity, yet each held the same spark of life, each whispered the same tales of home. Its radiance needed to be echoed, to ignite 1,000 other flames. And so the time had come for the seeds sown in Elderwood to take root elsewhere. The river still sang its lazy tune, the waterfall still rumbled its lullaby. But now the pathway leading to Elderwood was trodden by many feet. Their faces upturned, mirroring the flickering flames danced in his heart. Today he was not just a teacher, he was a representative of Elderwood, a torchbearer of a nearly forgotten art. The question hung in the air, a simple query that echoed the fears and hopes of many. More than 100 firekeepers had come from across the land. Yet in the depths of Elric's eyes, a hint of sadness flickered. As he surveyed the scene, he realized that behind the gleaming towers and intricate mechanisms, the glow of companionship and the warmth of tradition had dimmed. He knew the time had come for the teachings of Elderwood to reach beyond their sheltered valley. But how could he ensure that this flame, nurtured for so long, would not flicker and die but continue to shine, guiding others through the darkness? They brought with them lanterns shaped like animals, lamps filled with colored oils, candles wrapped in scrolls, braziers from desert tribes, and charcoal sketches of forgotten temples. Year after year, more visitors came. Only if we forget why we lit it. The girl looked back, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. As the night deepened and the fires crackled, the apprentices shared their craft, their techniques, their stories, their hopes for the future. At first there were few, a trickle of travelers seeking sanctuary from the encroaching dark. At the center of it all was Elric. No longer was he the boy who feared the dark or dropped wax on the floor. He was the first master of fire and light, guardian of a flame older than stories. His hair was streaked with gold, his eyes lined with purpose, and the calluses on his hands spoke of years spent coaxing sparks into life. He welcomed every seeker who found Elderwood, guiding them through flickering shadows, teaching them the language of flames, sharing the tales the embers wove. But as the years spun their web, a new desire stirred within him. One crisp autumn morning, the school bell rang. It was not the sharp chime summoning students to lessons, but a softer toll calling the firekeepers to assembly. The barn was too small now. The gathering was held outdoors, under the open sky. Elric stood before them. "This is not a ceremony," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years. "This is beginning." That evening, a great circle was formed at the edge of the village. Elric stepped forward and placed the vault flame in the center. "We are not here to burn brighter," he said. "We are here to burn together." Then the youngest apprentice, a girl no older than 10, whispered, her voice barely a thread in the vast expanse, "Does fire ever die?" Elric knelt beside her, meeting her gaze with gentle eyes. Later, as the embers glowed and the moon climbed high, Elric remained seated, lost in thought. Then he saw it, an answer born on the wings of the night wind. Days later, a rider from the city of Halworth arrived. "Master Elric, your teachings have reshaped how our city sees light." The villagers murmured in awe. Halworth had once laughed at candles. Now it bowed to them. As days turned into weeks, Elric prepared. He gathered stories, experiences, and insights gleaned from years of nurturing the flame. Before he left, Elric gathered the apprentices. When he reached Arculon, the grand city of the Assembly of the Seven Cities, he was met with wonder. What? The audience, a sea of expectant faces, was a testament to the city's brilliance. He began his address not with a grand flourish, but with quiet simplicity. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, yet he said, his voice growing stronger, "There is a different kind of light that cannot be contained in a wire, harnessed in a tower, or controlled with gears and levers." He struck a flint and lit a single candle, stood defiant against the backdrop of the city's achievements, a stark reminder of a simpler time. For a moment, the only sound was the soft crackle of the flame, as it cast dancing shadows on the faces around him. "Your cities shine," Elric continued, "but they forget to glow. Bring back the glow." His words echoed in the stunned silence that followed. By week's end, the assembly signed the light accord. The story made its way across oceans. Soon, distant islands and riverlands began writing to Elderwood. And so began the next chapter in Elderwood's tale, a tale that no longer whispered in shadows. Many lifetimes ago, fire came to the humans of Elderwood. It was a time before memory, so the old people tell it, that fire taught them how to live, shaping their lives as surely as water shapes the riverbed. For 10 generations, they passed down the flame until at last it came to Elric. Now, finally, it was time for him to pass it on. It was now 10 years since the first festival of flame in Elderwood. They stood in the old barn, surrounded by candlelight. Held in a great tent under the stars, the council sat in a wide circle around a central fire that had burned for 3 days straight. He read Thomal's letter aloud. The group listened in silence. Then Lena, now leading the Desert Light School, spoke. "I've seen the same in the East. I've seen what happens when light becomes hunger," he said. One day a hawk arrived bearing a sealed scroll. Elric broke the seal and read the message inside. Elric of Elderwood, your flames are beautiful, but obsolete. The world is moving faster. Still, Elric could feel the quiet unease beneath the surface. Beside the hearth, he taught them more than candlecraft and fire safety. When they were ready, he would choose a student, lead them to the old barn, light a single candle. You are the flame now, he would say. Pass it on so that no one forgets. And so, the cycle continued, linked across generations by a shared story, by a light that flickered even in the darkest times. For though the world had changed, some things never did. He taught them to listen to the silence between the hum, taught them to recognize the difference between light that warmed and light that merely shone. He taught them to welcome both, but to keep their purpose clear. He taught them to walk in the light of memory, while keeping an eye on the rising dark. During a rare visit to the city, he watched a group of children running through a dark alley. They huddled around a flickering candle Elric had tossed to them, their faces illuminated, then vanished into the humming darkness. He knew the pilgrimage wasn't over. The flame might have returned, but its teaching was still needed. There is no time for stories. Step aside, or be extinguished. Sindulvarn, architect of endless light, Elric read it once, then calmly placed it in the hearth and watched it turn to ash. We are not here to fight, he said to his students. We are here to burn without fear. They don't sleep. They don't stop. They glow. In one major city, power towers were kept on deliberately. Warnings were issued, no darkness zones allowed, public safety. Some fire circles were disbanded by city guards, but in Elderwood the flame still burned strong. People came by the hundreds, some walking for days. They left their wires behind. They carried only candles and open hands. And when they lit the first torch in the square, it was brighter than ever before. Elric whispered, even when forgotten, the flame waits. But they're hollow, Elric asked him. Did anyone listen? Thomel nodded. One girl. She followed me for 3 days, asking questions about candles. On the 4th day, she lit one for her mother's grave. He paused. That's enough for now, isn't it? Elric smiled. It always starts with one. Blue glow towers where no one talks anymore. Lights stay on even when no one's awake. Sana, the Sunstone Reader, added. My tribe's children refuse to light fire now. They say it's too slow. Then we must act, Elric said. Not to fight these lights, but to remind people what light means. But the candles were melting rapidly, far too fast. Elric Corbin said, what burns without heat is not flame, what glows without rest is not light. Groups of torchbearers traveled to cities and outposts consumed by the new light, the black glow towers, the wire-webbed spires, the places where faces no longer smiled under brightness. Every evening he lit a small candle and walked among the houses, showing people their empty reflections. At first they had sneered at him, called him a fool. But on the 3rd night, a young girl followed him. She looked at the dancing flame, then at her own face, pale and thin in the sickly glow. Why is my face like this? She asked. Thomel showed her a candle and a mirror. This is your face, he said, and this is what it can become. She took the candle, her fingers shaking. Can it really get better? Yes, he said, if you feed it. The next night she came back with another girl and 2 flickering candles. By the end of the month, 30 people gathered in the square. Listening to Thomel's stories of the South, of a place where the light lived in hearts and homes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. They didn't preach, they didn't protest. They lit candles outside buildings. They sat in silence where noise ruled. They told stories at street corners in the dark. Some people laughed at them, others ignored them. But slowly, quietly, some began to sit with them. They remembered warmth. They remembered shadows. They remembered themselves. What do I do? Elric asked. Corbin handed him a mirror, cracked and old. Show them what they look like in that glow. Only then will they understand. He woke before sunrise, heart pounding, a strange tension in his chest. The light was returning, but it wasn't his. A whole generation had grown up learning fire not as a relic, but as a living teacher. Across cities and villages, both electric lights and flames glowed together. Children could name candle herbs as easily as they could recite wiring codes. But even as the world learned to balance light, something else began to stir. In distant corners of the land, in places untouched by flame or wire, strange whispers arose. Whispers of cold lights that came from the sky, of machines that shone but gave no warmth, of places where shadows no longer moved. Elric listened on, felt the hair on his arms rise. The world wasn't just remembering, it was changing again. In the north, the city of crystal clear ice, Thomel. Now, a young man and master firekeeper in the northern ice cities sent a letter by crow to Elderwood. It arrived during the spring bloom. Master Elric, something is wrong in the north. There is a village near the Crystal Sound, where the people no longer sleep. Their lights never go out. They speak with glowing boxes. They no longer remember candles even. The children mock them. Worst of all, I saw a flame that casts no shadow. It burns black, and it hums like a wire. It makes people stare without blinking. I'm afraid this is not our fire, Elmel. Elric read it twice, then sat for hours in silence. A flame without shadow. It was not a light of memory. It was something else entirely. He thought of Corbin, of her tales of a world before light, of a time when people used fires of memory to chase away the endless dark. Corbin had shown him an old book then, its pages filled with diagrams of strange symbols. These are the Candlewise, she'd said. They taught us how to burn without needing the flame, how to keep the light in our hearts even when the candle goes out. These are the things you must teach Elric, so that no one forgets. He closed his eyes. Corbin? Did she know this was coming? Had she foreseen this change? That night, Elric dreamed of Corbin for the first time in years. The next morning, Elric called for a gathering not just of firekeepers, but of all torchbearers, including engineers, scholars, and even city light wardens. So began the pilgrimage of reflection, a journey, not of conquest, but of witness. Meanwhile, in the north, Thomel continued his vigil. Months later, Thomel returned to Elderwood, tired and thinner, but his spirit unbroken. But not all lightmakers agreed. Some powerful electric guilds, those who had begun building machines that never rested, began to see the torchbearers as threats. Soon, the annual Festival of Flame was disrupted for the first time in living memory. Over the next few years, life settled into a new rhythm. Now, when the moon was full, Elric would gather his students. Finally, he taught them how to pass on the flame. So this video is pretty different for us. Instead of having a narrative that cuts back and forth between two characters, we decided to try our hand at an extended metaphor. The wind has changed, and the world is now louder. Brighter, faster than it used to be. There are cities powered by electricity. There are machines guided by voices. There are cars instead of horses. They claim that they can give him a better flame that will never go out. But Elric refuses because he doesn't want to lose himself. He wants to die the way he's always lived, slowly, gently, honestly. The author can use figurative language and sensory details to create a unique world that readers can connect with on a deeper level. We're excited to keep experimenting with new styles and genres. Speaking of new styles and genres, we actually have a second story that we worked on. It's much closer to the style of content that we normally publish. It's called The Day the World Went Silent. And as the title suggests, it's a story about a world without sound. It was written with the wonderful Sarah Pinsker, who's also the voice of the wonderful narrator who narrates it. The key to writing an effective extended metaphor is to choose a metaphor that can apply to multiple parts of the story and to stay true to that metaphor throughout the entire narrative. The visitors leave, disappointed, but Elric feels lonely and misunderstood. He begins spending more and more time alone until one morning he disappears. His students find his empty bed and his written note. Then they light a big fire to honor him. The story passes on to a new generation and eventually to a young girl who learns how to use a candle. She feels a connection to the past and wonders if the light remembers everything. But in the midst of all of this rapid technological development, there is Elric, a man who still lights his candle the old-fashioned way with a matchstick. First of all, we chose a metaphor that could apply to multiple parts of the story. The flame is a great example of this, because it can refer to both a literal fire and to the abstract idea of someone's life force or soul. Additionally, the poem uses vivid imagery and sensory details to help the reader connect with the metaphor. For example, the reader can almost feel the warmth of the fire and smell the scent of the burning wax. By engaging the reader's senses, the poem makes the metaphor more tangible and easier to understand. And finally, the poem is able to stay true to the metaphor throughout the entire story. Even when the situation becomes more complex, the poem never loses sight of the central metaphor, and it never strays too far from the original concept. He lives in a village called Elderwood, which seems to be out of step with the times. Here, life is slower. People read physical books, and they rely on the moon and stars for light. But then we learn about a mysterious event that happened in Elderwood's past.